almost every customer we work with touches and leverages multiple clouds. So that's where we're going, because that's where the future is.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace? I thought I would start with just multi-tenant. Generally speaking, I think it's a pretty easy discussion. If you can go on one tenant, you should, right? So optimally, even for large customers, if you have, if there's a way in which, you don't have administrative configuration or regulatory reasons to have isolated tenants, your long-term goal should be one tenant. Now, the reality is that goal can be delayed by multiple years if you have mergers and acquisitions where the agency and the organizational structure and things like that haven't been worked out. So you really do need administrative separation. You need a lot of these things. But I do find that many times those are seen as temporary, like there are periods of time before that merger happens. Another key consideration here is that sometimes this will be a forever state for some organizations. Like there are even nonprofits, there's other organizations that we've worked with that have like really complex reasons that they have multiple tenants for regulatory reasons, et cetera. And in that model, I will say it's nice, at least that Microsoft's added a few lightweight ways to manage multiple tenants, like being able to see the service health across tenants, the service requests. I mean, I use this all the time. Obviously, as a partner, we have our own view of it, but even as like a person who owns multiple tenants, it's very nice to be able to make requests per tenant and manage it that way. So there's definitely some improvements here, but there's definitely a gap as well that Microsoft still needs to close. So any comments on your end, Christian, on sort of multi-tenant versus single tenant, beyond the things that I've maybe mentioned in that opening remark?
Yeah, I just say that one scenario that I've seen is like shared services organizations where there needs to be like a firewall separation between legal entities, but it's the same company, but they have these different divisions that need to keep separate. And that's actually, I'll say that it's more common than Microsoft wanted to admit. Yeah. And they slowly, as a community, especially MVPs, have provided very strong feedback about the capability. So I look at like the creation of the shared channels capability within Teams as even though it's not perfect, but it meets some very specific and important scenarios, things that the MVP community has been pushing on really since Teams launched day one. Yeah. It's important.
The other thing to think about this particular pattern is that, for some organizations, there's new features that they're not aware of. So like information barriers, things like that, there might be other ways, multi-geo, right? Things that obviously you want to look at from a costing perspective, but might be alternatives that are better with a singular model for tenant. Well, let's dig into that challenge, because I think we have some reference points a little bit later for deeper dialogue and discussion. But let me just build up the slide. When we think of, ignore that little slide in the middle. That's okay, everyone. But yeah, like there's a lot of different cloud systems. So maybe if you want to open up here about the fact that we live in a multi-cloud world, and I think the data that I always use is 90%, which is an accurate number. 90% of organizations are multi-cloud. So what do you do, right, if it's not all in Microsoft 365?
Well, that's the thing too, is that especially now that so many organizations that didn't think they could ever be in the cloud, so global experience where there's so many organizations said, hey, we can actually do this. It doesn't mean it was all perfect. And so there's a lot of different things that are out there. And so you look at this slide, like over on the left side, you do have collaboration that's happening and file sharing across all of these different systems. And that can slow down process and workflow and version control and other things. And then the biggest pain that I always still have, with new external vendors and partners needing to collaborate with them. And there might be different scenarios that we run into that make that more difficult. Over to the right, you have the shadow IT. So of course, and ignore that little slide in the middle there. But you have these other systems that are out there. Yeah, if you're able to, there it is big, but we'll come back to that.
Sorry.
But with the shadow IT, so you have all these other solutions. This is kind of what I mentioned earlier, is that, look, your end users, If they're not able to get their work done with the solution that you've put in place as a centralized IT organization, they need to get their work done. They'll find a way. Users are like water running down a hill. You put a rock in front of it, the water goes around the rock. And so that's where you have these other solutions. I always like to say that IT should not be the department of no. You should have conversations with the end users when you find these other third-party solutions. Like, why did you select this? Why are you using this other unapproved system or tool? And it may be that there's an education issue. It might be that there's features that are not enabled for their division. I mean, so have that as a conversation. At the very least, you might actually say, okay, I understand why you're using this other solution and it's approved, but we need to be able to manage that because as a company, it's a risk, it's a security risk if there's intellectual property that's in a system that you as the administrator don't have access to. So it's better to have a conversation, let that be out in the open, than it be hidden.
There's this analogy I've seen customers use, which is kind of like the insurance analogy, because one of the problems is funding, like getting the right direction here. So first, I am agreement. You don't say no, but you say yes and, right. So it's like so yes and for us to manage that, or yes and to make sure that this is compliant, we can do this. So that's like a trick there. But the example that I run into a lot is it's really hard to get like people to invest in security, or why should I not use Dropbox or whatever, right? Why should I use the equivalent tool you're providing me? And so I found some customers that use this sort of insurance analogy, and it works out well, where they say, look, you can always go and do something different. You can go buy an expensive car. You can do whatever you want. The thing is your premiums will go up, right? So whether it's funny money or real money, like we track that, hey, you're using certain tools and those tools have a cost because we're responsible, right, for security. We're responsible for risk mitigation and things like that. So we will secure those tools. We'll do whatever we can to do multi-cloud security patterns and things like that. But hey, there's your premium goes up, reported or real, right, for revenue and share cost transfers. So I think like using that premium analogy also tends to work quite well here. So let me move on. I'm just going to skip over this slide if that's okay, just for the sake of time.
Yeah.
And talk about consolidation, right? Because sort of there's two lenses to this, right? Is it, do we connect and integrate across these clouds, or do we consolidate? So if you want to talk about consolidation a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I love this because one of the reasons to consolidate is that top line stat. There's like, I think it's a Gartner data point that the average number of SaaS applications, 137. And you're thinking, how could that be possible? You think of shadow IT and what people are using, different departments and tools, very quickly adds up with all those different things out there. And obviously, there's going to be consolidations. There are efficiencies that can be gained by reducing the number of applications that are out there, and efficiencies of scale that'll happen as well by having better access to the data, having a better understanding of, talking about Viva and the analytics around how people are actually working. If you're not tracking, if you're not aware of all these different things, you don't really know how your teams are collaborating and how to improve on those things. So you're losing data, you're bleeding data by not having access to these things. So, but if you look at what's happening in organizations, so you have overall spending of SaaS is blown out. All the analysts, it's been much bigger than analysts predicted the last 5 years. IT, of course, can't keep up with all of that. So you have the additional maintenance costs. And as Richard was just talking about, like, we don't even know what some of those things are. Like, we can get into a whole discussion about like chargeback models and how you track the cost of those. I don't know anybody that wants to live in that world. It's very difficult. But then more importantly, and I think that risk management is something that more and more organizations are taking seriously and thinking about, because ransomware and other cyber attacks are up and they're making huge dollars out of it. We hear of all the big companies that get exploited, but the cost per user is like 5x for the SMB, for the small to medium sized business.
Yeah.
So it's so much more expensive to have the security risk. So if you're more vulnerable, if you're not aware of this, you're opening yourself up to other risks, and understanding what those costs are. Again, more and more organizations are asking those questions. What is the cost of the services that we know? What does it take to maintain? And then what is our risk profile? And doing an assessment that's out there.
So two quick notes here. It used to be actually easier when everything went through a firewall, right? If everyone was in offices, because you could just capture the data. You could take your firewall logs, if you don't know this, upload it to Microsoft, cloud inspection, and essentially it tells you how much data is going to like Dropbox, how much data is going to Google. Like it'll break down everything and tell you exactly where people are going. Obviously, that's complicated in a remote work environment if you're not, having everyone go through VPN. So there are new challenges here, specifically in the last few years, where the visibility we've had, shame on us if we haven't been actioning that. Please, if you haven't heard of that, please, start to use those tools to just understand exactly how many of these apps, right, are in your organization, exposing risk. And then I think the data is like 13% or something of organizations actually feel, like they have, multi-cloud security and multi-cloud compliance. Very few organizations, even though 90% have it, feel confident there. So I think that's a really good call out. I just wanted to call out this challenge that the reality is, yes, a future state where we're consolidated and everything is in Teams, and Teams is your central hub for your organization, for every employee. And inside of Teams, we have Loop, and Loop integrates across all these different apps and tools. And between Teams and Loop, and Outlook, those three experiences, which all integrate well and richly together, we've solved our problems. Well, the reality is, and that is the direction, by the way. The reality is, for most organizations, that can take multiple years or may never happen. Right? There may be, certain organizational units that just absolutely adore Slack, and even though you really, really want to consolidate them into Teams, which you should, fundamentally, I'll be biased and say that it can take time and effort. So Slack and Zoom might be redundant investments, and maybe long term are going to go away, but the app gap, right, for Slack, for Teams, could be a big challenge for the migration. And I know, we use AvePoint for migration from Slack to Teams a lot of times, and it's really challenging without, third-party tools or without more complex programs to do that. So we're not trivializing the effort it takes to consolidate, but we are saying, generally speaking, most customers do have a long-term consolidation strategy. And then if they don't, or if they have a long period, they'll do a lot of rich integration. And I think, the integration points that we have with Teams, with, what is it, something like 700 plus apps now today you can integrate, that becomes a great starting point. Or Microsoft Search, right? There's hundreds of connectors. If we look at third party, and then even first party, there's like 10 plus out of the box connectors that Microsoft Search has, that, quick wizard, like next steps to integrate and pull data in from multiple systems, like, Confluence, or from ServiceNow, things like that. So, those are huge benefits because it allows us to work alongside that. One of the ones that I think a lot of customers don't know about is on the compliance journey side, you can actually integrate data from these other systems to then, manage with e-discovery, like all the stuff you do in Microsoft Compliance Management. So, there's multitudes of ways to integrate while we work on that consolidation strategy, right? And you mentioned shared channels before. I'm, big heart. Shared channels are amazing and such a good example of how the future of, working across tenants and working across, collaborative environments with partners, customers, et cetera, can be a lot easier operating companies. So, yeah, let me move on from that just briefly and pass it back to you to kind of wrap us up here and talk a little bit more about, you guys work across many customers just like we do. And of course, we're building integration points like these, but what are some of the management challenges and how do you kind of tackle that, or what have you found works there?
Well, one of the things, AvePoint has been known, for those that, if you're familiar with the brand, even a little bit, we're the largest Microsoft 365 data management ISV in the world. We used to talk about that we have more engineers working on SharePoint than Microsoft does, which I think is still true. But our kind of tagline there is around helping organizations to collaborate with confidence. So that is our goal. So we've kind of rebranded some of what we do, is we're also looking at the reality of the multi-cloud world. And you can jump to the next one as well, is that it's all around, optimizing SaaS operations, but it's around this confidence platform. So if you are a little bit familiar with AvePoint, we have our AvePoint online services. So all of the products that you're probably familiar with, if you're familiar with cloud backup and cloud governance and policies and insights, and our new Entrust product, our new Confide, which is a virtual data room solution for mergers and acquisitions, for example. All of those things, you first deploy the AvePoint online services, which has now been rebranded as the Confidence Platform. And so it's really around those three areas. One, that secure, scalable architecture, so things that integrate in, we're FedRAMP authorized, SOC compliant, like all these different certifications, is then that data orchestration. So that's the level of automation in between the clouds. And then, of course, the intelligence that we pull out of that. So if you think about how that works, is that our bread and butter, the vast majority of our business was within the Microsoft stack today. If you go to the next slide, I think it helps illustrate this. But we recognize that our customers, they might have all of their employees. In fact, a great example is I live next to a couple major universities that are huge Office 365 consumers of that. Every teacher, every student has access to that. And yet Google is everywhere. Slack is everywhere, all those different things. And so what the Confidence platform allows to do is that you'll be able to be able to go in and create your policies, create your rules. You might have the majority of your businesses, but one business unit, they're using Dropbox, they're using Box, they're using Google Drive, they're using, and of course, all of our salespeople are on Salesforce. And we've got some Dynamics instances as well. So with all of those different things, you can in one place go in and create policies for those things, and it's then managed across based on the capabilities of those systems, but across all of those different systems. So that's really what we're leading towards. So you have the control suite. You think of the governance, the classic governance capabilities, fidelity, which is making sure that we've migrated over, the data is in the right place. And again, that's that ongoing activity, not just one time. And then the resilience portion of that, which is the backup, the maintaining, the compliance, the records management, all of those capabilities. So you have all of those that are out on the think of that as like the interface into the front end into. Then you have the next build here goes down through that data orchestration engine. And then we also have industry and role-based applications that are out there. So here's where you have like AvePoint EduTech, we have our examine and curricula. We also have citizen services for like local government, our records capability. And then you have things like Confide, which is that VDR or virtual data room solution, and things like MyHub, which are productivity focused. So we're going to be building, you'll see more and more applications that are point solutions that are industry specific, that are specific user scenario specific, that also interface with this data orchestration. And automatically, when we release like MyHub, a new MyHub type product, you'll know that it integrates in with the orchestration engine and automatically works with all of the other clouds that we integrate with. So that's our direction, because we realize, again, Microsoft centric, it's the vast majority of our business. There's tremendous growth that's happening out there. Like right now, we have close to 9 million customers that use our products. And I think that the current number of for Teams is like 300 million. That's right. It might be higher than that. But you think of that, Microsoft, Satya is talking about growing that to like 1 billion people that are monthly active users of that platform. So that's a huge opportunity for us still, and yet there are equally massive opportunities across the other clouds. And the reality is that companies are not just single stack companies anymore. That may have been true 20 years ago, but it's not true now. There are almost every customer we work with touches and leverages multiple clouds. So that's where we're going, because that's where the future is.
Yeah, so I think, vendors, Microsoft, we're all shifting towards multi-cloud, and with, obviously maybe there's some centricity to like Teams and things like that, but yeah, 100%. I think those are app dev patterns that you're describing too. Like, how do we think about solutions we build internally? How do they work across multiple clouds? I think those are all things that we need to start thinking about. And maybe, using Teams, shared channels and things like that, because those have apps and there's an app development model and that works across organizations, could be a great entry point for that. So let's kind of wrap up with a couple of key concepts here. Don't underestimate the integration. I think we've highlighted that partners can help close this gap right across multi-cloud. I do think it's a fair statement, right? If we're talking about multiple tenant, things like shared channels and some of those other mentions that I've shared are helpful, but really real compliance and governance patterns across multiple clouds, multiple tenants are probably going to require a third party. Now,
one other thing I would say on that, just on Richard, is that on that last comment is also the fact that the focus should be on the end user experience, not on the tools. Sure. Like when you're thinking about those things, and so that's why multi-tenant and why multi-cloud becomes so important, because if you're thinking about it from the perspective of the end user experience versus, hey, that we own this tool and we own this tool, therefore you get this, but you should be thinking about it from that end user perspective.
Yeah, agreed. So, the experience drives everything nowadays.